So analytics is always great after lunch. We talk a lot about, my slide deck is going to be all about data. So no, it's not going to be about data. It's going to be about the story of analytics. So right through the entire sessions, probably a lot of people present a lot of data to you. I'm not going to bore you with data. What I'm going to present to you today is the story of analytics. Before we get started, my slide deck is slightly on the longer side, so if you have questions, I will come back to you after the event, or I'll keep my slide deck up for you to kind of, I can share my slide deck with you guys. But what we're going to talk today is, I'm an analytics guy. I love data, but I'm not going to talk about data, okay? I'm going to talk to you about the management of analytics. How do you build a world-class business intelligence practice for an organization? And this is the story of how I came to Lenovo, how we built up the practice. It's going to be 2 years for me at Lenovo. Prior to Lenovo, I was at Comcast, and we built up the analytics practice at Comcast too. So coming back to Philly, this is home. Right now, I live in North Carolina. So the key takeaways in my session is you're going to understand the analytics maturity model. You're going to learn how to structure an analytics practice. And 3 is you're going to learn how to drive operational excellence. I don't think a lot of people focus on the management aspect of analytics. So everything today that you're going to learn is about tips and tricks as to how to navigate organizational intelligence as to how to build a practice. So let me start with the concept. This is the story of how we built the practice at Lenovo. For those of you who don't know Lenovo, we are a small $35 billion Chinese startup company. We actually make the ThinkPad product. Not well known in North America, but we are the Dell of China. Lenovo has big aspirations. We are just the #1 PC company in the world today. We just overtook HP last month. But we have a long way to go in terms of the mobile computing devices. So for us, big data and analytics is very critical to win against our larger competitors like Apple and Samsung. So I want to talk about the OODA model. It's Find Your Analytics OODA. So as Brent spoke that he was in the Marines, I have a slightly different take on this. So OODA is actually, it's from decision loop theory. So fighter pilots, when they go through like their dogfight training scenarios, they're encouraged to go through their OODA loop as fast as possible because that's where decisions happen. So when I started my job at Lenovo, when I was invited to build the analytics team, I had to go through my OODA loop. So OODA basically means you observe, orient, and decide and act. And the faster you go through your OODA loop in building out your practice and identifying, I'll walk you through the constructs of OODA, but the faster you go through your analytics OODA, the faster you can make executive decisions and actually grow your practice. So let's start with observe. When I first came to Lenovo, my executive team told me that they had this grand image of analytics. They actually, if you think about it, they always wanted to be like this big mansion, which is like really expensive and all of that. So this was what was communicated to me. They're like, Ashish, hey, we want this practice to be best in class. We want it to have all the bells and whistles. They didn't give me budget, and they didn't give me people. So that's great. So actually my practice looked something like this when I first began, right? I had to learn that in organizations, I rather ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. So you have to go out there, get the money, build the people, and build your practice. You got to do it yourself. But how do you navigate through that? Because a lot of us work in companies that do not allocate budget dollars towards analytics. If you understand the very function of analytics, we are a cost center to an organization. So how do you get analytics to be associated to P&L or a P&L business unit so that you can get funding to run your practice? So don't despair. There is a maturity model. So it's not that you can have a best-in-class practice. You've got to start somewhere. So I'm just going to walk you through the maturity model of analytics. And in any organization, a lot of organizations go through this maturity curve. They don't just start by, everyone talks about big data today. You don't get to big data unless it's a crawl, walk, run. So for a lot of organizations, sorry, I don't have a pointer out here, but you actually start off with reporting. And as you get to be more proficient in reporting, you move on to automation. As you get more proficient with automation, this is a linear, it's not exactly linear, but this is an evolution of analytics in your organization. So what you have to do is observe where you stand in that, in that maturity model. It's like having an analytics practice is like having a kid. You can see it grow and mature as you move along. So from automation, you move to measurement. Measurement is where you begin to realize you have a lot of data issues and your data is not accurate. And that's the time you have to go back and fix it. But once you finish the measurement stage, you reach on to business insights, where you actually now begin to actually analyze the data. It's more about what we call it as descriptive statistics. I'll explain this a little bit more in details. But it's where you're looking at the whole population size and saying, this is how customers behave. Once you move on that stage, that's the time it gets into optimization. Now you're doing all your A/B and multivariate behavioral and personalization tests. That's where you get into the optimization, where you're actually now taking action on the analysis that you've done. But all of this up to optimization is almost like a postmortem of everything that has happened in the past. Where it really gets to be interesting is on the predictive and the extend. So on the predictive side, this is what we call it as inferential statistics, where you're actually predicting what behaviors a customer is going to take even before they take it. So so we run a lot of forecasting, simulations, but that comes into predictive analytics. And this is an area which is increasingly going to be, which we're increasingly going to play in. The industry is fast maturing towards predictive, and extend is multi-channel. So though predominantly I have a strong web background, a web heritage, there's a Forrester research article that says 54% of all online conversions, of all offline sales by 2015 are going to be web influenced. What that means is that consideration is going to be driven online. They may not buy necessarily online, but they're going to buy through an offline channel, as a result of which having a great online experience is going to increase the likelihood or the propensity to buy. So you can actually online impact an offline conversion, and that's the true power of being predictive and multi-channel in the online space. So on the observe where you are, and then of course where you want to be in, say, for example, fiscal year Q3, Q4, and Q1. So this is something that I presented early on to our organization and said, hey, today we're actually here, and this is where we can be. This is just an example, but this is an example to get you started. But this was something that I had presented 2 years ago. Finally, it's define the vision, right? This is for your team. So I inherited 2 analysts when I came in to Lenovo, and they were kind of just a loose band of analysts which were kind of needed a mission. So it's very important as a manager to be a strong leader and define what exactly is your team going to do. So for me, I made it pretty clear. I was like, my team's going to focus on 3 things. We're going to create a world-class business intelligence practice for Lenovo, and we're going to do 3 things, and we're going to do it well. That's testing and optimization, predictive analytics, and multi-channel analytics. These are the core founding principles of my team at Lenovo. So whatever we do, my team has a vision. They know exactly where they're heading towards and how they're going to get there. So once you've observed the maturity of your practice inside your organization, now is the interesting part. It's the Orient part. So the Orient is understanding there are 3 parts to Orient. This is what I call it as, this is the most critical part about it. It's kind of a little bit long, so bear with me. It's people, process, and platforms, right? 3 Ps, very important. This is the meat of your practice. So it's very important to understand the constructs. The constructs for any practice, any healthy analytics practice, comes with 3 parts to it. The people, which is the most important. It is I can't stress this enough. I know we have a lot of partners out here who always want to sell you the next big whiz-bang technology solution, but I'm technology fatigued right now. I believe that for every analytics practice, it's the people that matter. The process is the second most, and the last, I believe, is technology. So for all those technology providers out here, I know this kind of is not exactly something you want to hear, but it's people come first, process, and then last is technology. So on people, right? This is an organizational model, how do you structure an analytics team? This is something I've refined over the years. I spent a lot of long hours at my previous employer, Comcast, and I burnt my fingers, but I've kind of learned what the fundamentals of a good analytics practice should look like. What is a healthy analytics practice? So at the core is the platforms piece. That's the foundation, right? Generally, you're going to have some kind of engineering service, or you could use a developer to kind of implement all your code or your databases that you need. But with that, you also need a data modeler or an architect who will help you define like your database structures, the data flow diagrams that you need, which applications talk to what. So that's something at the core that you're going to need for a healthy analytics practice. On top of that comes what we call it as the operations layer on top of the platform. So this is the team that does all your reporting for you. Although I don't like to focus on reporting, but reporting is the bread and butter of any analytics team. You have to do it whether you like it or not. Now, we don't try to spend too much of time in reporting. We try to automate as much as we can because we want to focus on the higher order business insights that we're actually focused on. But reporting and project management becomes pretty critical. As your practice grows as an analytics team, you're going to need at least one strong project manager to play quarterback for you because there are going to be so many projects going on internally that you need someone who can run point across all those different projects. So project management and reporting is another function that you're going to need on your team. And finally is what I call it as the strategic layer, which is the testing and optimization. And finally is I maintain a small R&D team. It's a research and development team, which we always look for new products, new technologies out there in the industry that you can actually bring to the table. And finally is what I call it as business insights. That's the pinnacle of what we do. So this is where it's all the modeling, all the predictive analytics. This is what I have a team that does all the modeling for me right now. In terms of business value, as you go from platforms to business insights, yes, it's from low to high. You get a ton of business value as you go up the value chain. In terms of business criticality, however, the platforms need to work, right? If the platforms don't work, if the stakeholders don't get their reports, that's not going to be good. So this is just the overall foundation elements or big building blocks for what you need for a good analytics practice. Fine. Next, you got to do a skill gap assessment because based on the functions that I described, the 7 functions, you need to understand if you have the skills on your team or not. So this is just an example of a skill gap assessment that I had to do across my stakeholder base. So all my stakeholders, I have about 29 stakeholders internally. I looked across whether I can support all those 29 stakeholders inside Lenovo. And based on the different functions, I identified like, hey, do I have a gap or do I have? So for example, we identified that project management was a big gap, which we had to fill. So this is where, based on your stakeholders, you can at least map it out so you know where your weaknesses are and where you need to work to kind of fill in those weaknesses on your team. Finally, it's define the culture, right? So we have, for example, on my team, I don't have it in the slide deck, it would be inappropriate, but internally I have, we call it as the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are things that I have defined that my team will do, but more so what my team will not do. Because it's pretty often that in any organization that you're going to be impacted or people are going to come to you with different asks that takes you away from your core mission. So the ability to say, no, that is not what we're going to do is also pretty important. So in my 10 commandments, there are certain things that I have certain rules of, I call it the analytics 10 commandments for my team, but I have certain rules in here at the end that kind of will give you a flavor of what the 10 commandments look like. But my team, everyone on their desks, at their cubes, have a copy of my 10 commandments that they put up, and they follow that every single day. Third is process, right? This is how do you, so we focus on the people, the process. The process is very important to define your services to the organization. So this is an example of how I've defined my services to Lenovo internally, to all my stakeholders. I was like, my team is going to be responsible for 5 things. We're going to be doing implementation services for you. We're going to be doing database and engineering, reporting and training, consulting, analysis, and data modeling, and we're going to be doing testing and optimization. So these are the 5 things I have made it very clear to my internal stakeholders. This is what my team does, and these are the services we provide. Once you've done that, it's important to define what your intake process is. I've seen a lot of teams fail because they don't have a clearly defined project management or intake process for requests that come into your team. This is just an overall example of what an intake process looks like. I know it's got a lot of, it just talks about you start with the business question, which is the stakeholder. You define your business requirements, technical requirements, develop application code, generate reporting, provide analysis, and then it's a final stakeholder presentation. So the way I've structured my team at Lenovo is I operate as an agency inside the client being Lenovo, my team being a consulting team. So we run a consulting practice inside the larger company. But the way we run, so I have a client engagement manager that will meet with my stakeholders internally, and we'll go through the entire process. Now, this is in the back end of our process, but we have a proper process mapped to take in stakeholder requests. When a stakeholder request comes in, we call it this T-shirt sizing. We T-shirt size their request, small, medium, large, so we know exactly how many people are going to be working against this project, et cetera. Finally, it's define the funding model. This is pretty critical. This slide is about if there's no money, you can't do analytics. And generally what happens is that for many organizations, if you understand where analytics fits in many companies, it's seen as a cost center. It's not seen as a profit center. So for example, e-commerce or sales. So for analytics to ever get funding inside a corporation is really hard. You have to fight because you're going up against the paid search guy who says he's going to generate a 1:8 E to R on an investment. And your executives are going to ask you, is like, what is analytics going to do to generate? If I invested $1, how much am I going to get back? So making those business cases becomes really hard because analytics has an indirect impact on the business. It doesn't have a direct impact. So I'm going to talk about how we've overcome these issues of funding and been able to grow our practice. So what I've done is that we've created like a funding model. When a stakeholder comes to me for requests, we kind of put them into 4 categories. We call it the silver, gold. I know this is cheesy, but we put them into the silver, gold, and platinum tier of service. And depending on how much they pay us to do, because we operate as a consulting agency inside, depending on, they get a level of service. And I make them aware of what tier of service they have with us, right? And I keep it competitive. Because I was like, oh, you're only a silver member. You need to be a gold member if you need to get higher level of service. And finally, it was what we call it as the Jeeves or the concierge. So this is where we will handhold you and provide you our end-to-end services. What this creates is that it creates analytics as a service unit. It creates it as a business unit inside your larger corporation, as a result of which this allows you to get the funding that you actually need to build a practice. Next is to understand your stakeholder landscape, right? Now, there are 3 things that you need to understand about the stakeholders. I don't want to go into too much of detail, but there are 3 characteristics of a stakeholder. One is that you have power, authority, and urgency. Those are the 3 aspects of a stakeholder. If a stakeholder has power and urgency, that's a dangerous stakeholder because they have the financial muscle and the urgency of the business to outmaneuver you. So you need to understand very tactically which is your problem stakeholder, which is your good stakeholder, which is your partner stakeholder, and who you can rely on to actually get the job done. And then accordingly tailor your services or your level of service towards those stakeholders. This slide is a little bit wordy, but the objective was, the idea, the main theme behind this is, you don't need to read this, I have the slide deck, but the main theme is that this is a document that I have that I do share with our stakeholders as to, we define the roles and responsibilities up front. We tell them, like, this is what the analytics team is responsible for, this is what you are going to be responsible for, because it is a collaboration. So we set the expectations up front as to what we are going to do and what they're expected to do. So this is just a document that I have internally that we talk about, like what my team is going to be responsible for. And finally, this is not something that I'm kind of very excited about, but I call it as platforms. It's the meat grinder. So everyone's talking about big data, and I didn't want to include this slide, honestly, in the presentation, but it's like the elephant in the room. You have to talk about big data these days. So my life as an analyst has changed dramatically in the last 1 year. More so because this whole thing about everyone's talking about big data, and again, the focus is on the technology. Harvard Business Review had an article that spoke about the data scientist being like the most sexiest job in the 20th century. And, I kind of disagree a little bit because, again, it's about the analysis and not just, everyone's talking about Hadoop, and you can go, like, there's a whole dictionary of terms, HDFS and massively parallel processing and all of that, but no one talks about the end result, which is the analysis and what that impact has on the business. But just to give you, if you guys want to know what big data is in a nutshell, I'm going to like boil it down to you for just so that you can walk out of this room and say, hey, I know at least what big data means. Big data is actually 4 aspects of it. There's volume, where you're talking about petabytes of data. There's veracity, which is the data even good or accurate? That's pretty critical for big data, because today you can have a lot of data, but it's not good or accurate. Velocity, whether you're batch versus streaming, I'll explain a little bit more about this, and variety. So those are the 4 V's of big data. The volume, veracity, velocity, and variety. That is big data in a nutshell, right? This is the 30-second pitch on big data. There's a lot more to this, but this is what you need to know about big data. So how do you get to big data? Because my organization comes to me and says, Ashish, we need to be doing big data stuff. It's like, okay, we already are doing big data stuff, but you need to put it in terms of context of the maturity model. So if anyone comes to you and says, are we doing big data? You probably may be doing big data, you just don't know it yet. But remember the maturity model that we spoke about early on in the presentation? It actually maps pretty well. If you go through the maturity model, you will gain big data competency as you move along in the maturity model. So you don't have to go and do something that's exceptional for big data. It will happen if you just go through the normal maturity model of an analytics organization. So I just want to give you how it maps, right? So in the earlier stages, when you start with reporting, you generally are doing megabytes of data. And the activities that you generally will have is like data marts and spreadsheets, and you're using Excel, Access, or SQL to kind of run through, to kind of build your reports. As you get to be more proficient at that, there's going to be automation. So you're going to have more volume of reports going out. We're talking about gigabytes of data. So you're going to need some kind of database that you have. And a lot of automations or ETLs, APIs, like a NoSQL or a SQL database. So it depends. You could use any of these, but you're going to find a need automatically as you go through the maturity model to have these technologies in place. On the measurement side, when you begin to realize that there's data issues or data consistency issues, you're going to have a need for like anomaly detection software. So what we do is that you have data validation and data QA, the kind of activities that you're going to be doing, but the tag audit tools. So there's tag management, and there's like a whole bunch of tag management tools out there. There are anomaly detection tools. There's tools like T-Leaf, and which are massive debuggers, pretty much, which you can alert and tell you what's wrong with your data sets. As you move on to business insights, you're looking more at velocity. You're going to increase the velocity of your business insights. It's generally a lot of batch processing is happening at this stage. The activities that you have is segmentation. You're doing a lot of data visualizations, and this is descriptive statistics. It's about the entire population of the data set. You're just observing, and you're making, and you're kind of guiding the business based on your observations. The platforms that you probably might use, and these are just examples, I'm not endorsing anyone, but these are some of the examples we use. So you're going to use a lot of Tableau, Oracle, SAS, IBM, and Adobe. They have a ton of products that you could potentially use at this stage of your maturity. As you move into optimization, you're going to increase the velocity, right? So testing and optimization online is all about velocity. How many tests can you pump out there? How fast you can go through your OODA loop out there. You're going to be doing a ton of A/B and multivariate behavioral targeting and stuff like that. In platforms, you have Adobe Target, Google Optimizer. There's a whole bunch of them out there in terms of the platforms that you probably might begin to start to use as you go through the optimization. Finally, it's predictive. This is the fun part, where now you're extending into where it's not about descriptive, it's about inferential statistics, where we're looking at Monte Carlo simulations, where you're doing a lot of forecasting, where you can predict sales even before they happen, where you can predict how a campaign is going to act even before you launch. So a lot of data modeling skills now come into play. Kind of platforms that we generally use are SPSS, SAS, R, MATLAB, and there are tons of other statistical softwares. And finally is variety. So we're talking about structured and unstructured data, right? So structured is a clean CSV file, for example. Unstructured is all your social analytics and things like that. That's where now you begin to bring all that data inside your data warehouse. And the activities that you're doing is generally in this stage is multi-channel analytics, data enrichment, and data management. This is the concept of DMPs, data management platforms, and things like that. So, and tools that you're probably going to be hearing about is EDWs, which we call it as enterprise data warehouse, distributed and parallel computing, and cloud computing. So, the tools that we use are, we work with companies like EMC and Amazon with their EC2 cloud. So that's where you get into the variety of it, and that's how, once you go through the maturity model, you are going to be doing big data. You don't have to make additional efforts to go out there and do big data. Big data doesn't happen overnight. It happens through a process. And as you grow and mature your practice, you will get to the stages of big data. So this is just to give you a brief. My slide deck's available, so just as an overview of what we went through. Maturity stage, activity, and the platforms that you potentially would use as you go through the maturity stage. Finally, we are on number 3, that's decide. So it's very important to build. So once you go through all of that, I know that was a lot, but you need to decide on a 30, 60, 90-day plan. So anytime when you start a new job, it's very important to have a 30, 60, 90-day plan. What this sets up early on is a cadence as to what are you going to achieve. It keeps you honest as to what are the timelines you're going to set to achieve in that cadence of building out your practice. So this is just an example of a 30, 60, 90-day plan. You can have your own. This was mine. But this was, at least it mapped out for me as to in the next 30, 60, 90 days, this is what I'm going to do to actually build out my practice when I first started my job at Lenovo, when they asked me to kind of build out the analytics team. So I said I'll start on testing and optimization practice, launch a multi-channel analytics program, restructure operations. I have to lay off certain people and hire new people, so we had to change the composition. But this at least outlined to me, for me personally and for my team, as to what are the things we were going to be doing. And finally is act. So once you've got through all of this stage, once you've understood where you sit in the maturity model, once you've got your 30, 60, 90 day, once you understand the gaps in your team structure, driving a sense of urgency to execute is really critical. You want to move fast. We drive, for example, I drive a sense of urgency with my team. Every week, I have team updates as to what exactly was achieved for the week, and that's how I drive a sense of urgency. So I put it in their KPIs for the year, but every week I have a touch point, and based on that, I want to know what value has my team driven for the business, and I hold my team to that. Driving a sense of urgency, you want to go fast. The next is on the act stages. As you're going through that, it's called branding your practice, and this is from one of my 10 commandments. I call it make it red. right? Internally, we product differentiate our offerings to the business. So as my team, I look at my team and I say, what makes us unique? And how can we be unique from the other teams that exist inside a large corporation? You want to have uniqueness to your product. So for example, the way I structure things to be unique is we take care of all the brand elements. So anytime that there's a communication item that goes out of my team, it has a consistent look and feel. It's something as simple as that, right? Any email communication that goes out, we have fixed templates that we send out to the organization. We brand every single piece of creative or intellectual property or analysis that goes out of my team. It says, created by the Global Business Intelligence team at Lenovo. The reason why we do that is because slide decks get shared, emails get shared. They have passability value along. It is important that they know which team was responsible for the intellectual capital inside a corporation. Very often in large companies, the team that actually does the work doesn't get the credit for it. So hence, making it red and branding your practice and product differentiating it is very critical. And finally, communicate wins early and often. So every Sunday, it's real pain, but I will sit down and I will document every single thing that my team did for the week for that business. Every Sunday evening, I will ask them for updates, and then I will send a communication out to all the senior executives in the organization. This is something that's very critical. You need to do this because it's not if they read it or not. That is not the point. The point being is they need to know what value did your team deliver to your practice this week. They've made an investment in your practice. You have the fiduciary responsibility to provide them a return on investment on that investment. So they need to know. Every week I will sit on a Sunday. It's painful, but I will craft up an email to all the executives and say, this is what my team did for the week. And finally, I call this analytics bling, bright, shiny, bouncy, fluffy. Every analytics team, if you do what you're expected to do and you just, if you don't push the envelope, right? I always ask my team to bring new technologies to the table, bring new ideas, bring new concepts, bring new vendors, bring new partners. We're always looking for that diamond in the rough because we want to introduce the next big thing for the company to say that, hey, multi-channel analytics, that's the next big thing for you. Big data, that's the next big thing for you. So I have a team. So my team, I push them hard professionally to attend conferences, to read as much as they can over the weekend in their free time about what are the next big things that happen. And we share internally. If I come across an article, I'm like, hey guys, did you take a look at this? And as a result of which, we've got many new, we've created, as an analytics team, we were originally just a reporting team, but today we have many different facets. We create new businesses pretty much all the time. Finally, it's always cheerleader your practice. You have to evangelize your own practice. If you don't talk about your practice internally, people are not going to know what you do. So at Lenovo, I will find any opportunity I can to talk to any stakeholder at Lenovo exactly what my team does and how I can drive value for their investment. That is about evangelization. You are responsible for your practice. You need to go out there and evangelize. So this is what, if you don't cheerlead what your team does, automatically you're not going to, a lot of people are not going to know what you do, and funding gets actually impacted. So we do a lot of, we actually have, for example, to give you a tangible example, I have an analytics breakfast once a month. I invite analysts from all over the company and people who are interested in analytics to come and attend the breakfast. And I pay for the breakfast, but I say, hey, let's talk about analytics at Lenovo. But that single act of having them come to an informal event, a breakfast in the morning, and it's called the analytics breakfast. You come, you learn about analytics in your company. Those are kind of things, the small things that you do that help you build and evangelize your practice. So hopefully the key takeaways, you understand the maturity model, you learn how to structure an analytics practice, and you've learned how to drive operational excellence. So calls to action, when you go back to your jobs, please observe the maturity of your analytics practice. orient yourself, learn what are your skill gap assessments, if there's any assessments in your processes or platforms, and hopefully decide on a 30, 60, 90-day plan from there, and act fast. Q&A, and that's it. Thank you. I did pretty well. Okay. So please.